Okay, the next question we'd like to ask the audience is not about hacking, but how many of you have used an internet dating site? Do you want to raise your hand, or you don't want to raise your hand? Okay, well, the information that you can gather for that is going to be helpful for our next presentation. Our next presentation is going to talk about customer relationships and machine learning, modern relationships, and what machine learning and meaningful customer relationships can look like. So please give a warm round of applause for the Senior Vice President of Product Development at Zendesk, Mr. Adrian McDermott. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about machine learning and about customer service. And we're going to look at the parallels between establishing relationships with customers and establishing relationships in modern dating sites. So recently, I was stuck in Frankfurt Airport for a little while, as often happens. And rather than working on a presentation or working on this presentation, I took a look at a book by a stand-up comedian in America called Aziz Ansari. And it's a book that a lot of people at Zendesk have been reading. And Aziz sort of worked with anthropologists and sociologists to really study the way that modern relationships forming has changed and the way that modern dating has changed. It's been altered by messaging, SMS, social profiles, social media, and these kind of things. And he tried to understand how this has affected the way that we live. People no longer marry for necessity or because they need workers on the farm. Marriage is now an option. Relationships tend to be an option. And I think I was struck by the number of parallels here between the way that one forms relationships in one's private life and the way that relationships can be formed using dating sites and using the data science that applies. So at Zendesk, we provide customer service software. Our goal is to help businesses form better relationships with their customers. And we're a data company. We actually have billions of tickets with anonymized personal data in a large Hadoop system that we process a lot. And we publish kind of regular benchmarks of which country has, on average, the highest customer satisfaction ratings. I think the answer is New Zealand. Which countries have the lowest? South Sudan, I think, or something like that. And we look at kind of interesting trends and interesting graphs in this data. This is actually a graph. And the blue dots on this graph represent anyone who set up a trial with Zendesk, the trials of Zendesk that have been established. And the red dots represent Zendesk customers. Now, the lines in between, if you look, actually represent a shared email address between a trial and a customer. That could be an agent, it could be a customer, it could be the trialer, it could be something else. And what we see when we look at this graph is just basically a giant network of relationships. We see that companies, relationships between brands and consumers, companies and consumers, are forming and breaking constantly. It's like this constant movement of interaction. We see in our own data, actually, that the number of unique email addresses we're seeing as in new customers of our customers isn't growing as fast as the number of duplicates are. So there's just a certain number that the complaining public has a certain size, people requesting customer service, and we're seeing more and more of those people. So businesses are connected, right? People who set up a trial of Zendesk go on to be customers of other customers. Customers of customers become trialers of Zendesk. We live in a very connected world, and for a business, what that really means is to establish lifetime value for your product, to establish a long-term relationship. You have to work on that relationship and these little interactions. We can see parallels in basically the data science and the relationship science that goes on dating sites. So there's a dating site for everybody. There's so many of them out there. What I find really interesting is that so many of them actually publish a data science blog, because what they're trying to do is convince you that they have the best matching algorithm. They can make the best match. Which, one interesting thing about data sites is if their business model is completely successful, they will have no customers because basically all of the single people will be married. But we sort of troll and love to learn from those insights in those dating sites and the way that they treat data science. I love that data science has become a hallmark of just unique innovation and a way that these brands now differentiate themselves. We can look at some data from eHarmony. So on the column represents male preferences for food, the rows, and the columns represent female preferences. And what we can see here, if we look at this green one in the corner, the 44%, is that vegetarians make really good matches with other vegetarians, right? They kind of like each other. It's pretty good. That's the highest correlation. And as you go along the people, and you could argue, you would think that people who like one thing, everyone likes the same thing, right? But if you look at self-hating junk food eaters, which is the people in the middle of the pile, right? They want to be with basically anyone else but other junk food eaters, which is sort of an interesting insight into human behavior, right? We all aspire to have something inspirational from our partner and from the people that we meet, which is kind of good. But it also tells us that relationship matches are hard to predict. I think if you'd looked at this data in aggregate or anecdotally, you may have come to the conclusion that vegetarians tend to like each other, right? They can sit and be smug together. But you may not have realized just the relationships between other people and how they looked. And that's why sort of big data analysis comes in, right? You can't do that kind of pattern matching using the human brain. You need a little bit more scale to be able to take in that data. And we can see how that, that kind of data analysis can help us build better relationships. So we've taken from our own data, from the dating site data, and from using some examples from Aziz Ansari's book, we're going to look at 4 recommendations for dating tips for businesses, ways that you can meet and build better relationships with your customers and kind of learn to get along and what makes a good match. So firstly, there's just popped the question already. Secondly, it's not what you say, it's not what you do, it's what you say. Thirdly, don't play hard to get. And fourthly, the millennial point, we're all special snowflakes. We're all different, we're all unique, and we have to recognize that. So let's look at an example from Ansari's book. Take some inspiration there. Here's an actual text stream that he saw between 2 friends of his who were sort of trying to get together, right? So she's like, oh, hi. He's like, hi, I was just getting a Christmas tree. 4 days later, he's like, do you want to come to a new exhibit at the Getty? And she's like, no, I'm going to Disneyland, 9 days later, sushi on Thursday? And he's like, shit, can't do Thursday. How about Friday? And it goes on, right? I think, you don't really need Tableau to realize that this is not going to be a massively successful relationship, right? We have something that Aziz calls the secretary problem, this sort of, temporally shifted interaction that isn't really coming together and isn't very pleasing. And we see that in customer service data. So if we look at the graphs I'm going to use generally are, from Zendesk data, are satisfaction outcomes. So if you think, we measure customer satisfaction, our customers measure their customer satisfaction on every interaction, and it's positive or negative, just what we call a Nero rating. It's up or down. And then we use that kind of to predict. We use that as a measure of successfulness of outcome of any customer service interaction, whether it was a return or a complaint or something. And what we see in this data is the more agent replies there were on a ticket, the more back and forth there was to come to an answer, to reach an agreement, the lower the average percentage satisfaction rating was. So at 10 replies, you're kind of down in the 74% chance of a satisfaction rating. You presumably still solved that problem. You still found the right answer and had the correct interaction with the customer, but you went all that way and were not able to actually kind of come to, the effort that the customer put in basically took them to a point where they were like, yeah, I don't know about brand X. You have to kind of go around the houses with them, have a bit of a wrestling match to get any kind of answer, right? So there's a mirror there between human relationships and business relationships and customer service. Let's look at another example from Aziz's book. He is a stand-up comedian, and one of the things that he does is he walks out into the audience and he grabs someone's phone. He's like, can you unlock that for me? And then he starts poking around in their phone and making fun of them. It's unclear to me why you would volunteer your phone to a stand-up comedian, but people do. And this text actually came up in a show in Chicago where he pulled this guy's phone up and he's like, oh, I've been prospecting for ladies, I see. And then he turns around and he reads it. He's like, hi, Rachel. I never got a chance to ask you to dance at Marissa and Chris's wedding. I'm Chris's old roommate from Purdue. He gave me your number, and I wanted to say hi in a sort of texty way and introduce myself, haha. And I think as he said the word texty, everyone in the audience groaned. They were just like, oh. And Ansari is like, he sort of stands up, he's like, it's like you just announced you had a next generation sexually transmitted disease when you type that. He's like, there is no way that was going to happen for you, dude, which is kind of interesting. And we did a linguistic analysis on the English tickets in our system in particular to kind of look at those words and phrases that were the equivalent of Texty, but in a customer service form. And we found two things that were kind of interesting. One was there were this set of words that would be used by companies that generally would kind of lead to a reduced likelihood of a good satisfaction outcome, of the consumer enjoying that interaction, right? And there was a different set of words for customers that we could aggregate from this set, right? So if someone is saying disappointed, ridiculous, proof, pay, money, bundle, refund, right? These are all clear determinants of a dissatisfied customer you're not going to build a relationship with them or turn them around. The other kind of interesting insight that we got from this data was that the word cloud for each of our customers was difficult. It was actually difficult to aggregate together in terms of fetching data, and more on that later. But every company's unique touch points for dissatisfaction in terms of vocabulary is different. Transportation companies, for example, the touch point words were like barf and puke. If you throw up in a sort of rental car thing, they tend to charge you a lot of money, you tend to be dissatisfied, right? For other customers, it was related to a particular product. For daily deal sites, it was related to a particular daily deal, whether it be the spike. And so there's kind of a snowflake element to analyzing that language that you need to take into account if you're going to act on it. Another sort of English-only realization for us was that we could see in the sign-off language used by our customers, we could see a great deal of variation. So if you end your email to a customer with best wishes, you have a 72.6% chance of getting a good satisfaction rating. But if you say yours sincerely, which, they're both equally formal, right? It's sort of pseudo-random that it would come out like that, but we saw these profound differences between it. We have other data that shows that the more times you say sorry past the second time, each time it reduces the chance that you'll get a good satisfaction rating. Again, these are insights that you would only get maybe over many years working as a customer service agent in a particular organization, or if you had access to kind of some sort of big data analysis, some sort of linguistic analysis and natural language processing, and could actually come up with it. And it's unique and different in the context of each company. So that, there's a need for tools to deal with this. Let's take one more example from Aziz's book. So this is an interaction between the author himself and his girlfriend. I think she is in gray. And she's like, you come into the comedy club, to the hotel before going to the comedy club? And he's like, don't think so, going to get a glass of wine after the show with Zach. You want to meet us? 20 minutes later. Nope, one-word answer, right? Nah. She's like, I'll see you at the club. And then he's like, is that a grump text? And her response 16 minutes later is, not a grump text at all. Which is clearly not true, right? You can clearly see that there's a passive-aggressive nature to the delay in responses, and that things are not going well for Aziz tonight, right? Like, this is not a good thing. There's an analogy that we can draw as we move into customer service land and begin thinking about that, right? And that analogy is one to basically the time between agent responses. There's a set of effort metrics that you can think about. So once again here, we have the actual satisfaction, customer satisfaction rating outcome from tickets, and we have the hours between agent responses, right? And so maybe not a total surprise. This is sort of cognitively, I think we would have all expected this outcome. But there's the high degree of correlation, the R squared on this graph, I can't remember what it is, but it's pretty good. The exact correlation is that the amount of time between your responses, basically in the rapidity of your ability to respond, is going to have a significant impact on the outcome of customer satisfaction. And so we sort of call this in customer service data parlance the effort metrics, right? How much effort, or the timing metrics and the effort metrics, how much effort and how much time is it taking for the customer to get to a resolution point? And those are just, it's interesting that those are just fundamentally some of the most important determinants and predictors of the outcome of a customer service interaction, right? Because we're looking at this data in abstract of what the actual resolution was, right? Your luggage may have still been lost, but at least they told you they weren't going to find it again within 15 minutes. your car may have been destroyed by something, but the insurance company, at least they got back to you really quickly and settled it with you. And it's the way that you treat people, and the respect that you give them, the decency that you show, that really kind of can help determine the outcome. The final sort of way that we think about the final recommendation here is one of recognizing that all of your customers are precious little snowflakes, right? We call it the millennial principle. They're all special and wonderful and great. This is actually data from eHarmony. And eHarmony is probably the most prominent sort of data science publishing, along with OkCupid, dating site in the US. And what this shows is the x-axis here is the distance in kilometers between the two people on either end of the relationship, right? How far apart were they in terms of their primary residences? There was actually a study, I think it was in Philadelphia in the 30s, that showed that the majority of people getting married in Philadelphia in the 30s lived within 10 blocks of each other. There was a significant enough percentage who lived at the same address and were getting married that it was measured. It was like a few percent. And I had to spend a little bit of time thinking about that, because Philadelphia is a relatively civilized place, right? I'm like, what is that? And then I realized it's apartment buildings. It was people marrying each other in the same apartment building because they grew up in the same apartment building. I think modern times, distances have shrunk. But what we actually see is on eHarmony that there's a reasonable probability up to 10 kilometers or something like that. And afterwards, it drops off precipitously. The marks on the guide marks are error bars for the data. So that's a relatively accurate data. But then if you look over here, you can see that at 4,095 kilometers, there's a spike up. Does anyone know what that spike is? Maybe someone said it. It is the distance between San Francisco and LA and New York. It's the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast. So the conclusion one might draw is that people on the edges of America kind of, they get each other and they connect and they fly between those two places. The sort of Trump voting, gun owning, flyover state residents tend not to be attractive to the people at the edges, and not even so much to the people outside of their state or town, right? It's very localized. So there's a definite kind of, there's an interesting US cultural learning, I think, in this data that's borne out in reality, that people on either side of the coast kind of get each other. In the same way, we can look at sort of satisfaction data from individual Zendesk accounts and see what, do we see these same material differences, right? We've already said that we see a difference, certainly in the language treatment and the vocabulary between customers, but we also see here in just core fundamental data. So top left graph is the number of replies on a ticket, and then 0 to 100, the expected outcome. And so what we see for Zendesk, right, the meta Zendesk, our own customer service interactions with our customers, we see that the more replies that Zendesk has on a ticket with one of its customers, the lower the expected satisfaction outcome. Envato is a Zendesk customer, and they have a Zendesk that they use to talk to their customers, right? They have a Zendesk, they use Zendesk as a customer service platform. And you see that as you go across here, the number of replies on a ticket really doesn't make any difference until maybe the 5th or 6th, when there's a big drop-off. And so for whatever reason, Envato's customers are very comfortable having a back and forth with the help desk agent. Envato is a marketplace for web design professionals and creative professionals. And my personal theory here is that those independent web design contractors are the people who fill up all of the cafes and coffee shops and Blue Bottle coffee in San Francisco and sit there all day at their laptops working so you can never get a seat and sit down. And they kind of crave human contact, actual conversation. And so when they engage with a customer service agent, it's okay for a while until it becomes annoying and they actually have to work at it. But who knows? We can also see by channel that if they have to interact via the help button on the website, they're dissatisfied, whereas Zendesk basically has a statistically insignificant flat line. Doesn't matter how your ticket comes in, you kind of feel the same way about it, which is interesting. So those were sort of 4 basic tips for dating and business. 4 analogies for dating and business, right? It's like, just pop the question already. Nothing causes the spark to fizzle faster than too much back and forth, right? You need to get on with it. It's not what you do, it's what you say. The choice of words you have, the vocabulary, how you speak to your customers, the tone of your brand is incredibly important. You shouldn't play hard to get. The timing of interactions is hugely important. And then recognize that each of your customers is unique. Your customer service system is unique, and the way that it happens is unique. So using these learnings, we actually built a system to help customer service agents understand that. So, you can think about customer service agents we see over time, from the moment that their record is created and they become an agent to 3 years on, their expected satisfaction outcome for an agent grows with tenure. The longer they work at it, the better they get, which is awesome. And I think it's because they learn, they implicitly learn these metrics on the job. They understand the right words to use, how quickly to respond, the right things to say, and they just get better and better and better, and they can give faster, sharper answers. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be awesome if we could short-circuit that? But the human brain is this pattern-matching machine that then creates a set of outcomes that it repeats, that it understands that happen again and again and again. And to short-circuit that, or to turbocharge it, we thought we'd build a machine learning version of that by taking in 60 kind of signals in terms of effort metrics, time, and language analysis specific to each customer and seeing if we could apply it. We think that machine learning is going to alter radically the nature of a lot of enterprise software. I think you can think about the Industrial Revolution, right? It was all about manpower and horsepower, and then there was the invention of the steam engine, and suddenly machine power kind of obviated the need for manpower, and tasks that were manpower dependent could happen much faster, be incredibly more ambitious in work. If you think about robotics on the factory floor, we've basically been able to replace the opposable thumb as a unique human capability and use robots, right? Computers, if you think about it in their first introduction, were really about record keeping and bureaucratic form moving and all these other things. We've mechanized bureaucracy, for want of a better word, to an incredible degree, incredibly efficiently, but we haven't really replaced the white-collar worker, which just means that we don't need people to do filing and retrieve documents and do all of these other things and stamp forms and fill them in. So machine learning is kind of like this next wave intervention, and I think what it can do is apply those same transformative principles, like paradigm-shifting principles, but apply them to tasks that require human interactivity, right? And human interactivity is all about basically looking at a swath of data and building experiences and then being able to make better decisions based on the patterns that you have seen before. We're also pretty good at reading emotions and doing all these other things, but reading emotions isn't a huge part of processing email, and if you have enough data, you can substitute previous outcomes for possible emotion. And so we make every time an interaction comes in, we show the help desk agent, we take a best guess using our system and say, all right, there's an 86% chance you'll get a good satisfaction rating, or a 10% chance you'll get a good satisfaction rating. And they can do two things with that, right? They can sort of figure out how they want to respond and what they want to do. And as they make a response and they see the rating change, they'll learn faster what it is that works and what doesn't work. The second thing that can happen is support managers can say, all right, and actually one of our customers, Pinterest, I don't know if you're familiar with pinboards and Pinterest and this kind of thing, they get giant site, one of the largest referrers of traffic on the internet. And they get many, many inbound tickets. And what they want to do is make sure they protect their brand and give a good brand experience. And so they take all of the tickets that come in and run them through our satisfaction prediction model, and anything with a low score gets triaged to their most experienced agents, right? Because they can handle it better and deal with it. All of the other stuff kind of gets, distributed by skills or however else they do it, or geography. And so they've been able to actually redeploy their triage team from reading every ticket and doing faster signs on it to actually doing real work with customers, which is awesome. So I think more and more, in all applications, there are just smart ways to use machine learning that can help. The way that we're most familiar with, and the thing that I think we've all seen the most, is this ability to take large corpuses of text and apply machine learning to it to be able to make recommendations, right? There are amazing demonstrations of differential diagnosis in medicine by reading and studying every medical paper and every medical text. You can detect Kawasaki's disease in 3 minutes, which is something very few people have heard of. So we're building systems, given inbound from a customer, to be able to respond in like a timely and accurate manner by looking at what has gone before, pattern matching to all of the other responses that have worked or had a good outcome, and using those to kind of auto-respond. Which brings us to sort of the final example from the world of dating. As I said, there's a dating site for everyone, right? In the US, there's sort of Match.com, and then there's Tinder and Grindr. There's Christy and Mingle, and there's even J-Swipe, which is Tinder for Jewish singles who want to meet other Jewish singles, right? It's like super, super specific. It gets down. And then there was one more site. This is an actual quote from Hillary Clinton. And that other site was a site called Ashley Madison. And we know a lot about Ashley Madison because Ashley Madison didn't really protect their servers from people like the previous speaker, and they didn't encrypt their data. And so that data became available to everybody, and we can sort of learn about the characteristics of Ashley Madison from it. And one of the things that we learned was that Ashley Madison had 30 million male subscribers and 5 million female subscribers, right? And the business model of Ashley Madison was basically every time you sent a message, you paid for that message. So if someone contacted me and I want to reply, I think you'd initially buy 5 replies for $50, right? And each reply was like $10. So if someone had contacted me and I'd reply, it would work. Now, given the dearth of female participants in the network, right? Engagement was pretty low across the site. And being the entrepreneurial, low moral compass kind of guys that they were like, you know what we need to do? We need to build Fembots, okay? And so they built 70,529 Fembots that they deployed that were running, that were like little Turing machines, where the common opening response from a Fembot to a man would be, "Hey, you online?" And then if you replied, it's like $10, so you've engaged, right? And then it's like, you want to chat? You want to do something else? And so of the 30 million men on Ashley Madison, 20 million had received a Fembot outreach. 11 million had responded to it. So 30-odd% of the subscribers had actually engaged with a machine. And there was exactly one complaint to the California General Attorney's Office to say, I think I've been scammed by a Fembot. Like 1 out of 11 million, which is an extraordinary testament to artificial intelligence. Although when you look at the algorithm it was using, it was just like a long list of text, and it would pick out random segments and just say something, right? Because if you want to be fooled, you will be fooled. But there's I think there's so much you can learn about data privacy from Ashley Madison, clearly, but you can also learn quite a bit about customer service. Final graph. This on the left here is the expected satisfaction outcome, and across the right is the time to first response by the agent. So from you sending me an email, how quickly did I respond, right? You may notice that there's an outlier on that graph, and that's the autoresponder. And one of the things you can see is that this data set is probably 500 million tickets or something like that. One of the things you could see is if I respond immediately to your question, the satisfaction rating drops. I mean, it's a good 15, 17% that it actually drops because people detect it. And I think there's a lesson for us as we build machine learning systems and think about how to deploy them. And the lesson is that, so I'm English, I've lived in Asia and Australia, and now I live in Northern California. Siri on my iPhone is basically useless, right? I mean, it's it just doesn't understand a single word I say, and it's frustrating. And I think whenever we deploy kind of artificial intelligence, we need to make sure that we open it up and say, there is no man behind the box. This is an auto response, which is, we think this is our best guess using a search algorithm. And I think then you have a better experience with people, as opposed to, I am the intelligent wizard, and I have found this response, and here it is. And everyone's like, nope, that's not how it is. So hopefully, that was some interesting insights from data in terms of building relationships with customers. And you learned a lot about dating sites, or maybe you already knew a lot about dating sites and could teach me about it, I'm not sure. But thank you very much for listening anyway.